Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. After seeing Master God Diviner off, Bai Xiaochun's life went on as it had up to this point. Right now, the most important thing to him was not cultivation, but rather, the unborn children in Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo. No one would dare to violate the taboo of using divine sense to try to determine the sex of the babies. Except for Bai Xiaochun, he had no such reservations and had long since done so. Song Junwan was a bit let down at the news. It might not have been a big deal if Bai Xiaochun weren't the arch-emperor. But given his current identity, it meant that a boy would obviously be slightly more important. And unfortunately, Song Junwan was carrying a girl. It would have been easier for her to accept that if Zhou Zimo had also been carrying a girl, but as it turned out, she was carrying a boy. Although Song Junwan was a bit disappointed, she didn't want Bai Xiaochun to get the wrong idea, and thus hid her feelings. The truth was that Bai Xiaochun didn't care whether his children were boys or girls. He would love them either way. Eventually, he could sense Song Junwan's feelings, and spent extra time consoling her, and made sure she understood that he didn't care about that sort of thing. Another month went by. Both women were now very close to giving birth, and Bai Xiaochun was getting more and more nervous. Based on the auguries he had performed, the various preparations he had made, and the level of his cultivation base, he was completely and utterly confident that nothing was going to go wrong. And yet, considering that he was about to become a father, he was still worried. I wonder what it will feel like to be a dad. It was a question that would often pop into his head. Another thing he found himself thinking about was the subject of names. What should we name them? Although he had come up with a lot of ideas, he hadn't made a final decision. Bai Dabao? No, not impressive enough. Bai Cheota? Nope. His mom wouldn't agree. 1. Bai Lingfei? That final name made him sigh, both because it made him think of Du Lingfei, and also because of the fact that if he gave that name to his daughter, Song Junwan would likely chop him to pieces. Even as he was in the middle of contemplating various names, the Saint Emperor came for a visit. He came completely without advance notice, and in a way that no one in the Arch-Emperor dynasty except for Bai Xiaochun realized that he was there. The fact that he came just on the verge of the children being born caused Bai Xiaochun's eyes to flicker. As soon as he detected the fluctuations, he flew up into the air. As soon as he was out in the open, he locked his gaze onto a certain location off in the distance, where the Saint Emperor stepped out of thin air. He had been worried about a misunderstanding, and had thus appeared some distance away, instead of directly within Arch-Emperor City. "Second bro," he said. Laughing heartily, he stepped forward and embraced Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun was a bit surprised that the Saint Emperor had come so unexpectedly, and was curious about why he had come. One thing that worried him was that his Archean luminescence was still not ready to use again. On any other occasion, he would likely have feigned civility. But he was in no mood for that, and got right to the point. "What are you doing here, big bro?" "Oh, it's nothing important. I was just a bit bored, and was contemplating the fact that your children are about to be born. And that got me to thinking that the vile emperor might cause some trouble, so I decided to come stand guard for you." Even as he spoke, he sent his divine sense down into Arch-Emperor City, as if he were looking for something. Frowning, Bai Xiaochun waved his hand, expelling the Saint Emperor's divine sense from within the city. Narrowing his eyes, he said, "I appreciate your good intentions, big bro, but now's not really a good time." Clearly, Bai Xiaochun wasn't going to back down. At this point, the Saint Emperor was starting to feel a bit awkward, and knew that it would be easy for a misunderstanding to occur. However, he really felt the need to take a look around Arch-Emperor City. Sighing, he decided not to risk a misunderstanding. "I'll be perfectly honest, second bro. I know it's a bit rude to barge in like this, but the Saint Turtle has gone missing." As he spoke, he kept a close eye on Bai Xiaochun's facial expression. When Bai Xiaochun heard that the Saint Turtle was missing, he didn't have much of a reaction at first. But then his eyes went wide as he realized which Saint Turtle the Saint Emperor was talking about. "My little turtle? He's missing?" His surprise was no act. He had absolutely no idea where the little turtle was. "Yes," replied the Saint Emperor. "Half a month ago, he vanished. I wouldn't be too worried about it, except for the fact that he stole a bunch of lotus seeds before leaving." The Saint Emperor was clearly depressed. For years, the Saint Turtle had seemed fine, and the Saint Emperor had actually taken a liking to him. He gave him anything he asked for, and yet in the end, he had disappeared. His first reaction was that the little turtle must have gone back to Bai Xiaochun. However, moments ago, his divine sense had managed to sweep through most of Arch-Emperor City before Bai Xiaochun intervened, and the Saint Emperor hadn't picked up any traces of the little turtle. Furthermore, he could tell that Bai Xiaochun's reaction had been genuine. Back when he had formed the initial alliance with the Saint Emperor dynasty and the Saint Emperor himself, he had actually talked with the little turtle, and told him that he would come free him when the time was right, but not in a way that would harm the alliance. But because of the impending birth of his children, he had completely forgotten about the turtle. He was also taken by surprise by the fact that the turtle had gone missing. Feeling a bit bad for the Saint Emperor, and also slightly guilty, he was about to offer some more explanations when his expression flickered, and he looked off toward the horizon. Surprised, the Saint Emperor looked in the same direction. Before long, rumbling sounds could be heard as more than 1,000 huge battleships appeared off in the distance. Most of them were about 3,000 meters long, and very impressive. In the front was one particular ship that was 30,000 meters long, which was leading the procession in the direction of Arch-Emperor City. At first sight, one might assume it was an invasion. But there was no way that a procession of battleships this large could get from the border of the immortal domain to Arch-Emperor City without anyone noticing, at least not unless it was cloaked by an Archean. The procession was being escorted by a large number of cultivators, all of them people of Heavenspan. Strange expressions could be seen on their faces as they proceeded along with the battleships as they headed toward the city. When the residents of Arch-Emperor City saw what was happening, expressions of shock appeared on their faces as they assumed that they were under attack. Although the ships were too far away for them to make out the details of who was on them, Bai Xiaochun and the Saint Emperor could see clearly. There were men and women, with women clearly making up the majority. Furthermore, many of them emanated fluctuations that indicated they had the blood of the Heavenspan realm in them. Even more astonishing was how many people there were. The smaller battleships all had hundreds of people on them, and the lead battleship had tens of thousands. Lu Yuntao, the Saint Emperor blurted, shocked. Master God Diviner. Bai Xiaochun said simultaneously, his eyes going wide at the sight of Master God Diviner standing there on the 30,000-meter-long battleship, surrounded by tens of thousands of women. Apparently, these women were his concubines. And standing right next to him was a noble-looking woman in formal court attire, whose cultivation base was so high that she was clearly in the great circle of the demigod realm. In fact, she was actually a quasi-celestial, making her just as strong as the Grand Heaven Master. This woman was the Lu Yuntao that the Saint Emperor had just referred to. Even in the eternal immortal domains, people with cultivation bases that high were not common, and generally had the most powerful battle prowess aside from celestials. Soon, Master God Diviner noticed Bai Xiaochun hovering there in the air, looking stunned. As for Lu Yuntao, she spotted the Saint Emperor, and her expression flickered. Taking a deep breath, she clasped Master God Diviner's hand and flew off of the battleship toward the dazed Bai Xiaochun and Saint Emperor. Greetings Arch-Emperor, Saint Emperor. Greetings Saint Emperor, Arch-Emperor. The Saint Emperor looked at Lu Yuntao, and then at Master God Diviner, and then finally over at the battleships. You two are not daring to hide the truth. Lu Yuntao clasped hands, bowed, and said, Saint Emperor, this is your humble servant's family. And this is your humble servant's Taoist partner. It was a completely shocking development. There were tens of thousands of people on all of those battleships, and the majority of them had the blood of the Heavenspan realm in them. Before the Saint Emperor could react, Bai Xiaochun exclaimed, Are you addicted to having kids, Master Snort Snort? You were like this in the wildlands, and now here in the eternal immortal domains, you're still up to the same thing. You've sired an entire sect. Bai Xiaochun was simply bowled over. He had once thought Bruiser was impressive, but could see now that Bruiser only qualified to kowtow to Master God Diviner. The sudden revelation was like a lightning bolt striking from a blue sky. Then Bai Xiaochun thought about how much trouble it was dealing with only a couple women, whereas Master God Diviner had tens of thousands to handle. It seemed they all got along, which filled Bai Xiaochun with mixed emotions, primarily envy. Master God Diviner looked a bit embarrassed, and was trying to think of what to say when the Grand Heaven Master arrived with the other powerful experts from the city. When they saw the Saint Emperor, they were shocked, and although they weren't sure why he had come, they quickly offered formal greetings. Then they escorted Master God Diviner and Lu Yuntao, as well as the tens of thousands of people they had brought with them, into Arch-Emperor City. Bai Xiaochun looked on, his head spinning. All of a sudden, he thought back to how Master God Diviner had seemed to want to say something back when he left, and the pieces clicked. Clearly, bringing a family of tens of thousands on a big journey like this had not been an easy task. On the upside, the shocking arrival of Master God Diviner had eased some of the tension between Bai Xiaochun and the Saint Emperor. Considering that Master God Diviner and the other important officials had already seen that the Saint Emperor had come for a visit, Bai Xiaochun decided that he might as well invite him down into the imperial palace. However, the Saint Emperor was still feeling shaken by the incident with Master God Diviner. After confirming that the little turtle was not present, he sat down in the imperial palace in Arch-Emperor City to chat further with Bai Xiaochun. Second bro, what did you call that fellow? Master Snort Snort? Now that's what I called talent. He single-handedly sired an entire sect. Do you mind letting me take this Master Snort Snort back with me, second bro? Talent like that is sadly missing in the Saint Emperor dynasty. The Saint Emperor was truly moved at how this Master Snort Snort had apparently managed to keep such a huge family all happy and harmonious. Bai Xiaochun wasn't very pleased by the Saint Emperor's reaction. And he was also feeling a bit envious of Master God Diviner and his abilities. It was all made worse by the bitterness he had endured because of his own Taoist partners. If the Saint Emperor hadn't asked to take Master God Diviner away, he might have been able to keep a lid on his feelings. But now he was feeling quite irritated. You think that's impressive? Well, it doesn't quite measure up to me. With that, he slapped his bag of holding, causing heaps of love letters to whoosh out, forming a small mountain in front of the Saint Emperor. Feeling much better, Bai Xiaochun proudly said, "See these love letters? Each and every one is addressed to me. Back in the Heavenspan realm, all I had to do was nod, and I would have exponentially more wives and concubines than Master God Diviner." To see Bai Xiaochun casually toss out so many love letters caused the Saint Emperor to be completely astonished all over again. Some of the letters in the pile were actually yellow with age. You actually kept them all. They even survived the destruction of your entire world. The Saint Emperor suddenly felt like his understanding of life had reached a new level. First was Master God Diviner with his family of tens of thousands, and then Bai Xiaochun with his mountain of love letters. Bai Xiaochun felt a lot more confident now that the Saint Emperor had been so flabbergasted by his love letters. But then, just as he was about to go into some more bragging, he sensed 3 streams of divine sense sweep into the hall. They belonged to none other than Song Junwan, Zhou Zimo and Hu Xiaomei. Upon hearing that the Saint Emperor had come, they were nervous, and also worried for Bai Xiaochun, but knew that it wouldn't be appropriate to come in person. And thus, they sent some divine sense to check on what was happening. If they were in the imperial palace of Saint Emperor City, they wouldn't have been able to use divine sense to look in on an Archean. But this was the imperial palace of Arch-Emperor City, and the spell formations set up made it possible for them to do so. The first thing that they saw was a small mountain of love letters. Almost immediately, their streams of divine sense seemed to grow more powerful, lock down onto the love letters, and then suddenly vanish. Bai Xiaochun's face fell, and the Saint Emperor's expression flickered. Clearing his throat, the Saint Emperor said, "What were you about to say, second bro?" However, there was no way that Bai Xiaochun could be in the mood for continuing the conversation. Chuckling wryly, he scooped up the love letters and then tried to look calm as he changed the subject and continued chatting. As for the Saint Emperor, now that he was sure the little turtle was nowhere nearby, he decided that, considering the sensitive situation in the city, it wouldn't be good for him to overstay his welcome. Therefore, he took his leave. Bai Xiaochun absent-mindedly escorted the Saint Emperor out, his eyes occasionally flitting guiltily back to the palace. "What's the big deal? They're just some love letters. It's not like I asked for them." Trying to work up some courage, he headed back to his private chamber, where he planned to spend a few days in secluded meditation. However, his plan didn't work. That very evening, Song Junwan, Zhou Zimo and Hu Xiaomei put aside their differences and joined forces to appear at his private chamber. Bai Xiaochun was starting to feel even more guilty, especially considering how visibly pregnant Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo were. Although the two of them were smiling broadly, the ill will in their eyes caused him to wail in his heart. As for Hu Xiaomei, she had no idea whether or not she was pregnant, but for some reason she kept her hands resting on her belly as she stared at him. Song Junwan was the first one to speak. "Xiaochun, why did the Saint Emperor come to visit?" She spoke in a warm tone, and sounded very mature. If it weren't for the daggers she was staring, she would have seemed like the picture of womanly virtue. Well, it's that darn little turtle. He ran away. You know the little turtle, right? You don't? Well, let me tell you how I met him. You're actually part of the story, Junwan." Blinking, Bai Xiaochun prepared to go into detail, but before he could, Zhou Zimo snorted coldly and cut in. "Don't try to avoid the elephant in the room, Bai Xiaochun. Come on, tell the truth. Are you jealous of Master God Diviner?" "Jealous? Bai Xiaochun said loudly. Are you kidding me? Although he was nearly trembling with anxiety, he put on a look of righteous indignation and even a bit of confusion. I would never be jealous of him. Actually, he's the one who's jealous of me. Although, now that you mention Master God Diviner, you have to admit that the poor kid really has it rough. Zemo, do you remember those tribes from the wildlands? Back when I was heading back to the Heavenspan region, you escorted me some of the way, remember? As he prepared to continue with his story, Hu Xiaomei planted her fists onto her hips. Fuming like a hot pepper, she said, Big bro Xiaochun, you're the Arch-Emperor now. Although times are peaceful now, you can't slack off. You need to work hard on your cultivation. You need to focus. Bai Xiaochun began, but Song Junwan interrupted him. Xiaomei is absolutely correct. Xiaochun, you have a lot of important responsibilities. Although the three of us can't do much in that regard, we can at least help you with some of your menial tasks. Come on, hand over your love letters. We'll take care of them from now on. Before he could offer any further explanations, Zhou Zimo, who of course had the worst temper of all of them, stalked over, keeping one arm under her belly as she grabbed his bag of holding. And of course, he didn't dare to interfere as she completely emptied out all of the love letters. His heart was fairly dripping with blood as he looked on, feeling like he was being strangled. It was as if Zhou Zimo wasn't taking away his love letters but rather, all the romance that existed in his heart. Looking very pleased with themselves, the three women left with his love letters, leaving him standing there alone in his private chamber, scowling on the verge of tears. As they left, he reached out morosely as if to grab a hold of something, except, there was nothing to lay his hands on. My love letters. Moonlight tumbled in through the open door of his chamber onto Bai Xiaochun as he stood there in a daze for a very long moment. Finally, he sighed, his life seemingly devoid of meaning. If I'd known this was going to happen, I wouldn't have pissed off so many women. Depressed, he couldn't help but think that having one wife was definitely the best thing. Two was incredibly annoying, and three or more was simply too dire of a situation to even think about. Xiaomei used to be great, but now she's been led astray by the other two. He had originally wanted to focus on meditation, but now simply couldn't focus. Eventually the sun began to rise. At that point, he looked down at his bag of holding and thought about the collection of love letters that had once been his pride and joy, that he had so often poured out of his bag of holding to dramatic effect, evoking looks of envy from onlookers. But now his love letters were gone. Feeling miserable, he flew out to Gongsun Wanner's secluded meditation facilities. He could sense that she was inside practicing cultivation, and he was tempted to just go in. But he knew that she was at a critical juncture and that he shouldn't disturb her. After a moment, he sent his divine sense out into Arch-Emperor City, hoping to find someone to talk to. He saw Big Fatty Zhang, who was meditating. He saw Shu Baosai, who was in the middle of dramatically boasting to a group of friends. And he saw Master God Diviner, lounging in the midst of a group of concubines. He saw Patriarch Spirit Stream, sadly looking at the command medallion of a dead disciple. He saw Li Qinghao off in the distance, holding a handkerchief in his hand. He even saw Shangguan Tianyu, who had once been so spectacular, but who was now quiet and reserved. He still looked like an unsheathed sword, but now he sat alone, quietly drinking and muttering about Zhou Xinqi. As he looked out at all the familiar faces, his expression suddenly flickered as he realized there were two auras in the city that were somewhat familiar, but that he hadn't encountered for a very long time. Those two, he murmured. With that, he vanished, to reappear outside of a mansion somewhere in the city. It was a two-story building, with a fragrant osmanthus tree in the courtyard. As he stood beneath that tree, he looked up at one of the windows in the building, which was lit with lamplight, framing the silhouette of a graceful woman. Perhaps she sensed that something had changed outside, as the window slowly opened, and a beautiful face appeared. When she looked down at the osmanthus tree and saw Bai Xiaochun, her eyes widened, and mixed emotions played out on her face. Instead of clasping her hands in greeting, she simply looked at him. Chen Manyao, he said softly. All of a sudden, he realized that he had not been paying attention to who had arrived in the new Arch-Emperor dynasty. For one thing, he had been very wrapped up with worrying about the balance of power with the vile emperor and the saint emperor, and for another, he had been very focused on his unborn children. He wasn't sure when Chen Manyao had come, and had it not been for his frustrated, fidgety mood, he wouldn't have sent his divine sense out to check on everyone. Presumably the Grand Heaven Master knew that Chen Manyao was here. After all, she was his apprentice. And the fact that he hadn't said anything to him was very telling. The Grand Heaven Master had lived for many years, and had a lot more life experience than Bai Xiaochun. Obviously, he didn't want Chen Manyao causing problems in the imperial harem. 1. When Chen Manyao heard him say her name, she bowed her head. A somewhat blank look could be seen in her eyes as she thought back to events of the past, but after a moment, she sighed, and gave him a curtsying bow. Greetings from a humble commoner, Arch-Emperor. Her form of greeting instantly caused the gap between them to widen. The two of them stood there quietly for a long moment before she quietly closed the window and blew out the lamp, casting her room into silent darkness. Bai Xiaochun stood there under the osmanthus tree for a while, unsure of what he was feeling. Finally, he sighed and vanished, reappearing outside of the Spirit Advent King's official residence. The second familiar aura he had detected earlier came from a woman named Xu Shan. Years ago, she had been like an explosive dragon, and after becoming completely infatuated with him, had chased him relentlessly. Although she was still beautiful, she was now visibly older than before. She was unaware of his arrival, and he didn't speak to her. He just watched her for the time it takes an incense stick to burn, then left. All of a sudden, there was one person in particular that he realized he missed dearly. Du Lingfei, he murmured. He left Arch-Emperor City to fly on a quick tour of the Arch-Emperor dynasty's immortal domain. However, no matter how he searched with his divine sense, he couldn't find any clues as to Du Lingfei's whereabouts. It was not his first time looking for her, he had searched on numerous occasions. The eternal immortal domains were vast, but no amount of searching had led him to even a single clue. According to what Taoist Heavenspan had said, he had also searched for her, to no avail. The night passed quickly. Eventually, the sun began to cast its rays out onto the lands. As Bai Xiaochun hovered there some distance away from Arch-Emperor City, he looked around at the world, and realized that he had once again grown up a bit. As the dark of night was slowly driven away, the world seemed calm and peaceful. Bai Xiaochun sighed, his breath turning into a cloud of steam. I just hope everyone can be happy, for all eternity. He was the only one who could hear his murmured words. Unfortunately, he knew that the peace and quiet of the moment were only temporary. Inevitably, something unexpected would happen, and the calm would be shattered. It could all happen very quickly. If the vile emperor or the saint emperor made a move on him, they would quickly realize that he didn't have any Archean luminescence. And if that happened, then the only thing which awaited him would be the dark of night. And the Arch-Emperor dynasty would go with him. I have to become a real Archean. Only then will I truly qualify to contend with the other imperial dynasties. Slowly, his heart began to grow calm. He knew that wasting time complaining about his situation would do no good. And there was only one thing he could do. Practice cultivation. Looking up, he vanished, to reappear in his private meditation chamber in the imperial palace. Settling down cross-legged, he closed his eyes and immersed himself in cultivation. He had reached a stage where he couldn't simply practice ordinary breathing techniques to advance his cultivation. That was especially true considering that his time immemorial codex had not yet been completed. Unfortunately, the Taoist magic that came with the third level of the codex, which he called the future will, continued to slip out of his grasp. Not even using his sovereign aura had helped, he had been missing some form of enlightenment. But now, his thoughts and emotions were calm, and as he worked, the future will began to slowly take shape. It was almost like augury, and yet, not. As his spiritual power coursed through his energy passageways, the future will began to grow clearer, and he felt more free and clear than ever. He even started to form a strange resonance with the world around him. He wasn't sure how much time passed. Perhaps days, perhaps months. He lost track of the flow of time. Unfortunately, he was stuck in an endless, dead cycle, and he couldn't complete the final step to create future will. But then, one morning at dawn, he heard the sound of a baby crying. It broke his concentration as it echoed through the imperial palace, causing him to shiver. Despite the fact that he was immersed in cultivation, he couldn't miss the fact that a new life had come into the world, a life that was connected to his own blood. In that very moment, the dead cycle he was stuck in quivered. The birth of his child seemed to represent a limitless future, causing his heart to shiver and his mind to spin. In that very moment, everything clicked. The final level of the time immemorial codex, the future will, was a success. As Bai Xiaochun made his breakthrough, the Arch-Emperor dynasty was on high alert. Masses of cultivators stood guard outside of Arch-Emperor City, ready to fight to the death against any potential invaders. It was a day of utmost importance to the citizens of the Arch-Emperor dynasty. Today, the emperor's children came into the world. When the sound of a baby crying echoed out from the imperial palace, the large group of devas who were standing guard directly outside erupted into cheering. Soon, the cheering spread to the countless other citizens in the city at large. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes. Forgetting all about his newly developed technique, he rushed over to find Song Junwan's midwife rushing out of that wing of the palace, flanked by a whole entourage of female cultivators, and holding a baby. "Congratulations, Your Majesty," she said, hurrying over. "May I present your daughter?" With that, she carefully handed the baby over to Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun couldn't stop his hands from trembling as he gently accepted the baby. Moments ago, she had been crying, but as soon as she was in his arms, she looked at him, her little eyes sparkling like stars. Then she laughed. It was a crisp, clear little laugh that seemed like the rising sun. As soon as Bai Xiaochun heard it, his heart melted. "My daughter. This is my daughter. Bonuses. Everybody gets a bonus to their salary." Laughing contentedly, he began to walk around randomly, staring at his daughter the entire time. He almost looked like a child. Then he hurried into Song Junwan's wing of the palace, where he found her laying on her bed, her face a bit pale. "Junwan, look, it's our daughter." Bursting with excitement, he began to pace back and forth. His daughter seemed a bit startled at first, but then started laughing again. She seemed excited, so much so that if her hands weren't bound with swaddling, she might have started clapping. To everyone present, her cute laughter sounded like the most natural thing in the world. Song Junwan looked at the baby in Bai Xiaochun's arms, a motherly smile on her face. Then she glared at Bai Xiaochun. "Aren't you a bit old to be acting like a kid?" By this time, Li Qinghao, the Grand Heaven Master, the Giant Ghost King, and many other familiar faces had gathered outside of the imperial palace. Soon, word spread that a little princess had been born. Li Qinghao threw his head back and laughed loudly, and the Grand Heaven Master was visibly excited, as was everyone else. The Giant Ghost King seemed particularly pleased. "A daughter," he thought. "Good. That means Zemo's standing will be a bit more secure." Word began to spread through the city, and eventually out of the city. Before long, everyone in the Arch-Emperor dynasty was talking about the news. Meanwhile, in another section of the palace, Zhou Zimo was being attended to by her midwife and a host of other female cultivators. Bai Xiaochun had not forgotten about her, but was too excited to leave Song Junwan and his daughter, whom he had already fallen in love playing with. Of course, Song Junwan knew that he had other important responsibilities to attend to, and in a rare show of warmth, eventually shooed him away. Moved, he kissed the top of her head, and held his daughter in his arms as he headed toward Zhou Zimo's wing of the palace. Almost as soon as he reached his destination, he heard the crying of a baby, a cry that was even more sonorous than his daughter's. It was almost like thunder. Even more startling, it caused all cultivators in the Arch-Emperor dynasty who had the blood of the Heavenspan realm within them to feel physically shaken. It was a reaction from the blood itself, and even affected Bai Xiaochun. Shaken, he stopped in place, his eyes wide as he looked over at Zhou Zimo's room. Shockingly, a pillar of crimson light could be seen from that direction, rising up into the heavens. All the lands trembled, and the clouds seethed. At the same time, the aura of the Undying Codex spread out in all directions, causing numerous citizens to gasp, and then reflexively drop to their knees to kowtow. Damn, quite the show-off, huh? For some reason, Bai Xiaochun suddenly felt a bit jealous. "You've just been born, and you're already making such a big scene? Nothing like that ever happened for me. And how come that aura seems to have surpassed the level of the Undying Skin? You're already in the Undying Heavenly King level?" Even as these thoughts ran through his head, his daughter, seemingly startled, began to cry again. This time, her crying was different than before, and almost seemed defiant. It seemed to contain power that could pierce all the way to one's soul, and represented something that could live forever. It was the type of power that could tug at the hearts and minds of countless individuals, and could sow chaos in heaven and earth. Even more shocking was that, in addition to the crimson pillar of light shining up into the sky, the image of a live forever lamp appeared in the sky above his daughter, which seemed to rival the pillar of light in terms of magnificence. Bai Xiaochun's eyes nearly popped out of his skull, and he almost dropped his daughter. If he was jealous because of the aura of Zhou Zimo's child, then he almost couldn't breathe when he realized what kind of aura his daughter had. The Live Forever Codex. His mind was spinning with incredulity at the fact that his daughter innately possessed the aura of the Live Forever Codex. "Are they kids, or monsters?" he murmured. Meanwhile, the Grand Heaven Master and other important figures were visibly stunned. But then, their shock turned into excitement. "Your Majesty, with children like this, our Arch-Emperor dynasty will last for all eternity." Amidst the cheering, Bai Xiaochun looked down at his daughter, and then in the direction of Zhou Zimo's room, and a smile broke out on his face. Whatever. If these little buggers are awesome, then so be it. In fact, I hope they surpass me. That way I can eventually retire and spend my days having fun instead of being an emperor. Already entranced with the thought, he hurried over to Zhou Zimo's room. As he did, the door opened and the midwife emerged, baby in her arms. Congratulations, Your Majesty. May I present your son? Bonuses. Salary bonuses for everyone. Laughing, he held his daughter in one arm and his son in the other, and danced with joy. It was almost as if he had forgotten that he was in the imperial palace. Then, he hurried in to see Zhou Zimo, who looked weak but in high spirits. Unfortunately, his daughter was still crying, and now his son was crying even louder. It was nearly painful to the ears, and no matter how Bai Xiaochun tried to soothe them, they wouldn't stop. Somewhat annoyed, Zhou Zimo waved at the midwife to intervene. However, Bai Xiaochun refused any help. If they want to cry, let them cry. What's wrong with crying? I love them whether they cry or not. Zhou Zimo didn't know what to say to that. Having placated her, Bai Xiaochun rushed out excitedly with his children in his arms to find Li Qinghao, the Grand Heaven Master, and everyone else who was waiting outside of the palace. Uncle Li, Grand Heaven Master, look, my kids. Bursting with enthusiasm, he proceeded to show off his children to the crowd. Eldest brother, come take a look. Hey, Shu Baosai, Master God Diviner. What do you think? Look, my kids. Everyone was laughing delightedly, especially the giant ghost king. Although he put on a show of looking at Bai Xiaochun's daughter, his eyes were glued to his grandson, and he was clearly itching to hold him. As for Li Qinghao, his heart was swelling with emotion. Bai Xiaochun had been like a child of his own, and therefore, these two children were like grandchildren to him. Xiaochun, have you thought of names for the two of them? Names? Bai Xiaochun looked down first at his daughter, his eyes shining with pride. Of course I came up with some. Alright, everyone. What do you think of the names I came up with? Li Qinghao instantly regretted asking that question. If he didn't understand Bai Xiaochun, then nobody did, but in his moment of excitement, he had momentarily forgotten what type of person he was dealing with. As soon as he saw Bai Xiaochun's visible excitement regarding the subject of names, he got a very bad premonition. He wasn't the only one to suddenly have a bad feeling. The Grand Heaven Master sucked in a breath, and Patriarch Spirit Stream's eyes widened in shock. And it almost wasn't necessary to mention Big Fatty Zhang, Shu Baosai and Master God Diviner. Strange expressions appeared on the faces of all present. Even the most simple-minded person wouldn't need to spend much thought to come to the conclusion that Bai Xiaochun would come up with some very unusual names. Most nervous of all was the giant ghost king, who, upon realizing that his grandson might live his entire life with a very unpleasant name, interjected, I came up with some names, too. I'll go first, just hold on, father-in-law. Bai Xiaochun interrupted with a glare. There was no way he would let anyone steal the limelight when it came to revealing some good names. The giant ghost king grimaced and sighed, secretly cursing Li Qinghao for what he had instigated. As for Li Qinghao, he was really starting to get nervous, and was just about to say something when Bai Xiaochun cleared his throat loudly and started talking. I've picked a very impressive name for my son. Majestic even. He will be named Bai Dada. By this point, Bai Xiaochun's eyes were shining brightly. He had thought of many names over the past few days, but none of them had seemed impressive enough. But this name made him feel like he had been struck by lightning, and left him shivering with enthusiasm. He was actually convinced that this was one of the best names he had ever heard in his life. In fact, in all creation, there were only two names which could possibly match up to it. One was his own name, and the other was his daughter's. As soon as he said the name, gasps could be heard. Big Fatty Zhang nearly started laughing, but ended up in a choking fit. Bai Xiaochun looked over at him. What's wrong, eldest brother? Big Fatty Zhang cleared his throat. Nothing, he said. That's a great name, really. It even has the Da character like my name. I guess we're connected by destiny. 2. Feeling very pleased, Bai Xiaochun looked over at Master God Diviner, who was staring at him blankly. After a few moments passed, Master God Diviner's expression turned somber, and he began to make some calculations with his fingers, as though he were performing a divination. Pleased with how seriously Master God Diviner was taking the situation, Bai Xiaochun turned to look at Shu Baosai. Looking very excited, Shu Baosai said, it's the type of name that resounds like heavenly thunder, that sounds like the heavens singing in my ears. It's especially appropriate considering that the Grand Prince's birth was accompanied by signs and portents in heaven and earth. Only our beloved prince could qualify to bear such a name personally devised by you, your majesty. Shu Baosai didn't seem to care at all that everyone else was likely despising him for his little speech. Bai Xiaochun was very happy. However, Li Qinghao, the Grand Heaven Master, Patriarch Spirit Stream, and the other members of the senior generation all seemed completely taken aback. Your Majesty, this name, Xiaochun, why don't you pick another name? Most of them were trying to be a bit discreet, but the giant Ghost King was not. Hell no, he shouted. There's no way you're naming my grandson Bai Dada. Are you kidding me? What kind of name is that? If you're going to name him that, what are you going to name your daughter? Bai Xiaochun? 3. Eyes sparkling, Bai Xiaochun laughed. Feeling prouder of himself than ever, he nodded vigorously. You really understand me well, father-in-law. You hit the nail on the head. My daughter's name will be Bai Xiaochun. What do you think? Together, Bai Dada and Bai Xiaochun will be unparalleled under heaven. At this point, everyone began to object. However, despite the fact that Bai Xiaochun wasn't generally a stubborn person, he wouldn't budge an inch when it came to the names. No matter what people said, he refused to change them. Eventually, people began to sigh in defeat. And the giant Ghost King was nearly on the verge of tears, and felt like he might explode at any moment. It actually made Bai Xiaochun feel a bit bad. After hemming and hawing for quite a while, he said, alright, listen. We can't change Bai, and we can't change Da. But since you're all making the same argument, I guess we can change the third character. Come on, father-in-law, you're a bit old to be getting all worked up like this. At long last, the giant Ghost King began to calm down. He stood there thoughtfully for a moment, his eyes bloodshot, until he finally gritted his teeth and suggested a new third character for the name. Let's change the final character to Bao. 4. Bai Dabao? Bai Xiaochun's lips twitched slightly. As for the rest of the crowd, they once again looked stunned. Li Qinghao's jaw dropped as he looked over at the still fuming giant Ghost King, and then back at Bai Xiaochun. Then he simply sighed. 5. The Grand Heaven Master stood there quietly, and Big Fatty Zhang and the other members of the younger generation all exchanged awkward glances. To them, it almost seemed like Zhou Zimo and the giant Ghost King weren't related at all. That's right, the giant Ghost King said loftily. Call him Bai Dabao. It's a lot better than that Bai Dada that you came up with. Bai Xiaochun scowled a bit, and then looked down at his son nestled in his arm. In the end, he didn't want to make the giant Ghost King too angry, and therefore, had to agree. Alright, fine, it's settled. His name is Bai Dabao, and her name is Bai Xiaochun. And remember, this isn't my decision, it's our decision. Bai Xiaochun was worried that Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo might get angry with him, but was convinced that these names were really good. Thus, he dragged everyone else in with him on this decision. It was hard to say if Bai Dabao could understand what was going on at this young age, but as soon as he heard his name, he started crying. In contrast, Bai Xiaochun was laughing merrily, as though she were very pleased. It made her seem even more charming. After a bit of time, Dabao apparently got tired and went to sleep, prompting Bai Xiaochun to gingerly hand him over to the midwife. Xiaoxiao remained in high spirits, and continued to laugh and chuckle as Bai Xiaochun held her. She actually seemed very curious about all of the strangers around her. Girls are definitely better, Bai Xiaochun thought as he looked at his daughter, his heart swelling with love. The following days were a time of jubilation in the Arch-Emperor dynasty, especially Arch-Emperor City, which was decorated with lanterns and colored banners, and was constantly abuzz with excitement. Messages of congratulations came from the Saint Emperor dynasty and the Vile Emperor dynasty, and most of the Celestials sent expensive gifts. Even Reverend Devourer and Prince Demon sent gifts, despite having been captured by Bai Xiaochun in the past. And there was little need to mention the people who owed favors to Bai Xiaochun, such as Sima Yunhua, Celestial Aged Spirit, Jiu Tianjun, and Shen Su. The biggest gifts came from the Saint Emperor and the Vile Emperor. After all, they were all involved in a complicated relationship in which the three of them controlled everything under heaven. And thus, the gifts they gave were spectacular. The Vile Emperor sent a large stone, and the Saint Emperor sent 2 lotus leaves from the lotus flower in his heavenly pond. Those 2 leaves were incalculably valuable. After all, the only place in the eternal immortal domains that had leaves like that was that heavenly pond. And the main lotus flower only had 18 leaves to begin with. Nowadays, it only had 14 left, and with 2 of them being given to Bai Xiaochun, it meant that the lotus flower now only had 12 leaves. Bai Xiaochun was quite moved by that gift. As for the stone given by the Vile Emperor, most people would take it to be equally precious. After all, the gift he gave was made from the flesh and blood of the sovereign in the sky over their heads. However, Bai Xiaochun knew that there was something suspicious about the Vile Emperor's identity, and was therefore very careful about the gift he had sent. Because of that, he didn't let his children have any contact with it. and the killing intent which flickered in his eyes after receiving the gift took a long moment to fade. There were also numerous gifts of congratulations that came from within the Arch-Emperor dynasty. However, only people who had actually known Bai Xiaochun back in the days of the Heavenspan realm were able to meet with him personally. Both Chen Manyao and Xu Shan came together to offer gifts. Chen Manyao seemed quite at ease, but Xu Shan was more conflicted. However, she seemed resigned to reality. After giving a respectful smile, she and Chen Manyao turned to leave. Bai Xiaochun didn't say anything, and sighed deeply as he saw them begin to walk off. He was not the puny cultivator he had been years ago. He was the Arch-Emperor now, and although he had vast and nearly unlimited power, there were still certain things he couldn't do. Although these two women had been connected to him by destiny in the past, their lives had changed in profound ways. All it would have taken was one word, and he could have prevented the both of them from leaving, but that wasn't what he wanted. When you don't care for someone, it's easy to say anything you want to them. But after you care for them, there are some things that just can't be said. This was a truth Bai Xiaochun didn't understand in the past, but understood fully now. After escorting Xu Shan and Chen Manyao away, he returned to the palace hall, and was about to go check on Dabao and Xiaoxiao when he heard a crafty and shrill voice coming from behind him. "Hey little Xiaochun, Lord Turtle is back. Get me some good food and drink, otherwise I'll stamp your son's face with a turtle mark." Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.